Good morning, everyone. My name is Stan Byers. I am the lead for the cybersecurity team at the USAID, or in the USAID Technology Division. I'm joined today by Chris Painter, who leads the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, and Anat Lewin, who is one of the leaders for cybersecurity with the World Bank. And I'll let them provide additional details on their background once we move to them. What we'd like to discuss today is, what more can we do to address cybersecurity as donors and as a broader development community? Where this is a rapidly growing field, we're starting to see more and more demand to address these issues, but there still remains a lot of uncertainty of what exactly the issues are, how do we address them, where do we find the capacity and resources, how do we go to scale, and how do we deal with kind of a multi-dimensional challenge that is that's a cross-cutting and affects almost everything we do in the development field. And so this discussion is meant to kind of push on some of those key questions and really ask, try and have a bit of a hard talk about how do we do this better? What are we doing now, and where can we continue to improve, and where is this going in the future? So I'm going to give some opening remarks. We'll do a couple introductions first, and then I'll give some opening remarks, as will Chris and Anat, and then we'll go to kind of a conversation on a set of questions, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers with all the participants here. So again, I'll introduce myself first. It's Stan Byers. I've been with AID for quite a while in different capacities, and we am now leading our cybersecurity team as an effort to really improve the agency's capacity on these efforts and as a part of our digital strategy. Chris, why don't we go to you and then Anat?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm Chris Painter, and thanks to the organizers and all the folks for joining today. Chris Painter, I'm now the president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Foundation, a worldwide capacity building, cybersecurity capacity building group. And before that, I was for many years a U.S. government doing various aspects of cybersecurity for about 26 years, including at the White House, at the Justice Department, and finally at the State Department.
Thank you. Anat?
Great. Good morning to everybody. Good afternoon to those of you in other time zones. And from me as well, thank you to the organizers. My name is Anat Levine. I'm a senior digital development specialist in the World Bank Group's digital development goal practice. And I'm our business line lead for cybersecurity and data protection. I've been at the bank for 22 years, so I like to say that I started when I was 5. And looking forward to talking with everybody today.
Thank you so much. Let me just start with a few comments about how we're looking at this at USAID, and then I'll turn to Chris and Anat for some additional thoughts as well. We established the cybersecurity team that we have now last year to lead the agency's capacity building efforts and to help identify and address some of the quickly growing cyber risk in development and humanitarian work. And we really saw the need for that because as we're moving to use many more digital technologies and data in everything that we do, we're increasingly seeing that there's a gap between the rapid increase in use of these technologies and the cyber efforts that are in place to secure them. And so in a lot of the environments that we're working with, this gap is continuing to increase as we see this rapid jump in connectivity, but not a rapid jump in cyber investment and capacity building. And that gap that is continuing to get bigger is being actively exploited by a whole range of actors. And so we're seeing increases in cybercrime, in disinformation, in digital surveillance. And that's been particularly true since the start of COVID, but we expect that this is only going to continue and that we really now have to think about this as a core development sector and something that we need to address in the development community, even though it's something that we're not really used to. Because cyber is really the flip side of the digital transformation that we're seeing broadly across the world right now, particularly as technologies like AI and other advanced technologies are being used to increase access to services and capabilities to a large number of people, including those in much poorer and often unstable countries where it's often difficult to get access to a number of services. Think digital financial services, healthcare, education, agricultural information, a whole range of different things. as well as just basic communications and access to news and media and so forth. All of that is now increasingly online. In fact, it's almost all being communicated online. But a lot of that, the data now that is being developed, that's being created through those channels, we're not thinking carefully enough about how that's affecting the environments in which we work, and how do we try to secure that data so it doesn't create new risks for already vulnerable populations often, or environments that are already politically, socially, or economically unstable. USAID tried to get a handle on kind of where all this is going in the digital realm back in 2020, and when we released the agency's digital strategy, and that really charts a path for us on how do we strengthen and promote open, inclusive, and secure digital ecosystems across the world, and particularly in the lower and middle income countries that we work. And one of the things that we really tried to do in what is only 2 years ago now, but where it seemed like early stages, was to include cybersecurity as a part of that digital technology vision of how this was being incorporated into our development efforts. And one of the things we tried to say was we need to expand our capacity as an agency to help governments, the private sector, civil society, and citizens in partner countries to mitigate harm through cybersecurity programming. And as a step towards that goal, we then in 2021 published the USAID Cybersecurity Primer. For those that have not seen it, I encourage you to take a look. We'll drop a link in the chat momentarily. But that was our initial effort to kind of give a 101 of how does cyber affect development. These are two fields that are not always seen together. We haven't really thought deeply about cyber in the development space yet, and we're trying to build up on that now through efforts like GFCE and what the bank's doing and what we're doing at USAID, as well as other donors. But we're still at nascent stages. And with this primer was meant to say, okay, for those that have not had a lot of exposure to these issues, let's talk about what it means. And let's look at what it means for our programming and for the different sectors that we work in. The other thing that we want to try to highlight as a part of our efforts is that we recognize that we can't expect our partners on the ground, whether they be local organizations or local governments, to shoulder the burden on all of this. There's some very sophisticated threats that are out there, and this space is growing very quickly. And to expect that end users of technology are going to be able to manage all of the cyber threats through better cyber hygiene, as important as that is unrealistic. And so we know that we need to also build capacities higher up the chain of making tools and services and information available to people so that we can strengthen kind of the whole supply chain of information and services that are out there that exist in the digital realm, and that we are helping to build those tools and build those capacities and make it available to more people. And I mentioned cyber hygiene. I think this is something that tends to get equated with cybersecurity, and it is a major part of what we do. We found that a lot of what we're doing as a team is really just building awareness on these issues. We're doing training with our missions around the world. We're doing training with implementing partners. And a lot of it is around basic cyber hygiene training. And that's super, super important, because if you just do those things, including multi-factor authentication, using strong passwords, updating your software on a regular basis, and a number of other kind of basic steps, that can solve 80%, maybe 90% of the daily problems that are out there, the daily risks and threats and risks. But there's still a lot more, and this space is rapidly evolving. And then there's a number of social, economic, and political issues that come into play as well. That one of the things that we want to talk a little bit about in our discussion today is this isn't just about cyber hygiene, but this is about a broader set of issues that affects pretty much everything that we do, and is kind of a mirror to all the digital efforts that we're currently engaged in. We also know that we need to rethink what we're doing. and this isn't easy for a big organization or, for a government bureaucracy. I mean, USAID is a government agency, and the World Bank is a big organization, very difficult to change. But we know that we need to try and rethink, and we need to try and build that agility more and more into what we're doing. And so that, again, is a part of what we're looking to do, is find that balance between how do you manage a big organization, how do you deal with the realities of a bureaucracy, of a government, for us, a government system, as well as, the same challenges that a lot of local governments and our partner organizations face as well. How do we work within those realities to really address this fast-moving space? And as a colleague of mine has said, understand that anything we do, any kind of cyber responses that we do, we shouldn't consider them as assets. They are a commodity, meaning that they're not just one-step solutions. If we can just put certain things in place, we're going to solve the problem. We need to put things in place and then recognize that it's going to continue to evolve quickly, and we're going to have to continue to develop new solutions. And so anything we have today is something that will be relatively short-lived, and then we'll need to continue to adapt. And that, again, is a challenge for the spaces that a lot of us work. So with that said, I will leave it there and then pass on to Chris and then Anat to give some initial thoughts, and then we'll hit some more points as we get into the questions. Chris, over to you.
Great, thanks, Dan. And again, I think it's really important to be with all the folks on the call from all over the world, especially because I think the majority of the people in the audience are from more of the traditional development community. And one enduring issue that I've seen that Stan sort of touched on is that in some sense, these communities are different. The folks who do cyber capacity building traditionally, which I really think is foundational, not just to protecting networks and combating threats, but really foundational to all the good things we're trying to do on the internet, all the digital development that we're trying to do. But it's often not looked at that way. And so the people who do digital development or just development more writ large often don't have a lot of interaction with or a lot of understanding of the cybersecurity community, and vice versa. And I think that's something we're trying to change, because it's important to leverage the efforts of both of those groups to achieve this. And I also agree with Stan, look, this is not just a technical issue. There's when we talk about cybersecurity, it's a pretty broad sweep that includes a lot of policy issues and institutional issues. The countries having structures and institutions to deal with these issues, things like incident response, parts of their government and the national strategies that deal with this, that much as many governments have digital strategies that kind of put these things together in a more holistic way. So that's very important too. So bringing these communities together and leveraging both of their efforts is important. And it's important because as we look at cybersecurity capacity building, as I said, that's everything from some of the technical issues that Stan talked about through to the institutional and policy issues that pervade the space. I found doing this for, both being the first cyber diplomat, but also doing this when I was in other roles in the government. We've done cyber capacity building in lots of different ways for a long time. But the challenges I think we've always seen are a couple of things. One is sustainability, making sure that indeed you don't do one-off things. You just don't do a training and move on. You don't just do, you actually track progress, and you make sure that if a country is building something institutionally, that they continue to implement that, for instance. Another is just political buy-in. A lot of these things are things I'm sure that the traditional development community that many of you have seen too, political buy-in, if you're dealing with a country, to make sure that they understand these issues and that there is some, again, sustainability and continuation of those. Another big issue is resources, quite frankly. I'm sure that folks out there who are in the development community think resources are somewhat constrained for you, but they're incredibly restrained for us. I think a lot of people think that the cybersecurity issues are just done by, militaries or police, and that's really not true. A lot of it is civilian stuff that needs to be done, and the resources have always been tight, and that sustainability of resources has been tight. And I'd say that, going back to the issue of the confluence of these various communities, the cybersecurity community and the development community, a couple of the first movers have really been on this call or on this call. The World Bank has been, and we'll, allow the World Bank to talk more about the World Bank, but they've been a partner of ours for a while now. And USAID I think has really, as Stan said, has seen the light in the last couple of years and understands that if you talk about a lot of development projects, whether they be digital development or even physical development, because a lot of things now are controlled by cyber means and subject to cyber, attacks either by nation states or criminals or someone else, that undergirds even that traditional development. So we were fortunate to have that, but a lot of, I think, there are a few others as well, but still, I don't think that movement has occurred. And the last thing I think, and the one I want to address for just a couple minutes before moving over to Annette, is this idea of coordination. And one of the challenges I think we've always seen is making sure that our efforts around the world are coordinated, particularly because the resources are somewhat slim, and making sure that we're not, that 7 different countries or 8 organizations aren't doing the same thing with 5 different people and 5 of the same people in a country. And so, I think the coordination is important. And in part to address those challenges, back in 2015, the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, the institution that I represent, was set up. And it's a true multi-stakeholder organization that involves over 60 governments, a couple dozen private sector organizations, a lot of civil society and academia, and institutional partners like the World Bank, USAID, several UN organizations, several regional organizations like the Organization for American States, the African Union, and others. And that group has both promoted cybersecurity capacity building, come up with a lot of tools and best practices. We have a portal where we call the Civil Portal, where we put this. All the website for the group, I'll put this in the chat too, is www.dgfc.org, which has lots of information on this. We have working groups devoted to various cybersecurity issues, everything from national strategies and diplomacy through to incident response and cybercrime, and a lot of activity that we've been trying to work on this, including trying to draw these better connections with the development community. So that institutional, that platform, the GFC, I think has been very active over now about 7 years. We're an independent foundation. We were started by the Dutch, but we are now an independent foundation, as I said, that's really comprised of people from all over the world. And we definitely want to include more of the traditional development community, more of you out there in our efforts in trying to make this, I think, a better solution for everyone. So again, thank you for being on this call. We'll have lots more discussion. And with that, I'll turn it back to Stan.
Terrific. Thank you, Chris. There's a number of points that would be great to follow up on as we continue the discussion. Anat, over to you, and I would love to hear more about how the bank is looking at these issues and kind of where you see our focus needs to be going forward.
Thanks very much, Stan. So let me start with a bottom line up front and then take a step back and walk you through a little bit more about what the bank's approach is on cybersecurity and where we're active. So the bottom line is cybersecurity is an important safeguard and risk mitigation measure, not only for the bank's own investments, so not only for the millions of dollars of financial support that we're providing to developing countries, but also to these countries' own investments in their digital economy and in their connectivity. So let's start with the obvious then. We're all increasingly reliant on digital technologies. And digital infrastructure and connectivity, which are 2 areas in which the World Bank has financially supported developing countries for decades, have become the backbone of the digital economy and the knowledge economy and our economies and societies more broadly. And this is the case, of course, also in developing countries. Digitization brings enormous benefits for achieving the World Bank's twin goals, which are the ending of extreme poverty and the sharing of prosperity. And so digital transformation in and of itself is a very good thing, and it's something that we're supporting through hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investments in developing countries. But this digital transformation also makes all of us more subject to vulnerabilities and risks, and especially cybersecurity risk. And that risk is driven by the proliferation of sophisticated threats that are increasingly difficult to manage. They're increasing in volume, they're increasing in complexity, and they affect complex software supply chains, and in the future also billions of IoT devices that will come online, also in developing countries. So cyber attacks, as you know, can result in breaches of sensitive data, in monetary losses. Some examples are wire fraud, business interruption frauds, ransomware attacks, especially ransomware attacks, which have been increasing recently by more than 400% in 2020, for instance. So some estimates show that the cost of such cyber attacks can reach an astounding $10.5 billion annually by 2025. And for a developing country, that really is a huge impact, because it can be, a percentage of GDP, it can be up to 2% of GDP that might be lost in financial losses due to a cybersecurity attack. So low and middle income countries, they often lack the ability to withstand these vulnerabilities and risks. So they lack the human angle, they lack the technical angle, they don't have the financial resources to effectively address the cybersecurity risk. And this gap is expanding. For instance, we've found that about 60% of least developed countries don't yet have a national cybersecurity strategy. And about 63 low-income countries or middle-income countries, they don't yet have a national cyber emergency response team, computer emergency response team to handle incident response. So they don't have the very basic capacities to handle threats, vulnerabilities, and attacks as they come in. And of course, one of the big issues that I think we'll talk about a bit more later is the acute workforce shortage globally, but particularly in developing countries. So we have over 4 million cybersecurity professionals who are needed worldwide. And this workforce gap is particularly striking in less developed countries. So as a result, developing countries are more vulnerable to cybersecurity risk than we are. For instance, in May 2022, just a few months ago, a ransomware attack on the government of Costa Rica was the first time that a country called a national state of emergency due to a cyber attack. They had 26 line ministries down. Their hospital record-keeping systems weren't working, had to go to manual. Their customs system wasn't working, so produce was spoiling at the docks. The online tax portal was knocked out. Everything was down, and it was pretty vicious cybersecurity attack against the public sector, and really showed us how much havoc this could wreak. Cyber criminals go where the money is, and as a result, also financial institutions have long been leading targets for cybercrime. The poster child of this, of course, is in 2016, the Bangladeshi central bank, having lost $81 million due to a cyber attack. And this is a very low income country that really cannot afford to cover the gap of $81 million from national reserves, which is what they had to do. So we really see cyber criminals not only focusing their eyes on high income country or the West, really going anywhere where there's money and where they can enter. And oftentimes they can enter in developing countries where maybe the vulnerabilities are higher and the gaps haven't been closed as much. These stories that I just told you about Bangladesh and Costa Rica are really just the tip of the iceberg, because the vast majority of cyber attacks are not reported, they're not detected, they're not disclosed. Very often, the targeted entities want to avoid negative press coverage or fines for data breaches or reputational damage. So, the very true extent of the financial losses can really only be estimated. So what do we do at the World Bank to support developing countries in safeguarding their investments and safeguarding their economies? And also, for instance, in the case of attacks on health sectors and hospitals and clinics, it can even go so far as to save lives. In an acute health situation, of course, the systems need to be up and running. And if they're not, you can not only lose GDP, but you can also lose lives. So more broadly, the World Bank is supporting over $200 million in investments in cybersecurity activities. Those are technical assistance activities and lending activities. And that number will only grow going forward because we see a lot of demand from developing countries in this area. Our pipeline for cybersecurity activities spans at least 64 countries. And there's, again, growing demand from all regions. So in particular, what we're doing is we're helping client design effective policy, institutional, legislative, and regulatory frameworks based on international best practices. So that means if a country needs to develop cybersecurity and cybercrime legislation or a critical infrastructure bill or policy or strategy, or set up a national cybersecurity agency, or figure out cybersecurity governance in a country where cybersecurity is really spread amongst a number of different pockets, and different islands of excellence, some empowered, some not empowered, some resourced, some not resourced. You know, we can really come in and help them create a good structure for cybersecurity from a governance perspective. We also, you know, and this is the big ticket item, of course, we help operationalize cybersecurity capacities through computer emergency response teams and through other ways of dealing with incident response, with threat monitoring, with drills, with simulations, with ensuring that, you know, public sector has a national cert, but then perhaps at a phase 2 for countries that are more advanced, there can be sectoral computer emergency response teams for the financial sector, as I mentioned, which is a big target, as well as energy. Electricity grids are a huge target in larger countries. Transport systems are a target. And, you know, other critical risk sectors we see as our public sector, of course, and urban smart cities, those kinds of investments, of course, the health sector. So those are the sectors that we see as critical, and we can support those as well. Countries always ask us for a lot of capacity building, training, and more training. So we provide a lot of that, but also setting up of digital skills for cybersecurity training program that is local. So helping them set up, let's say, a cybersecurity academy or a cybersecurity institution or learning center. In every country, it looks different. In some countries, it can be part of a university. In other countries, it could be part of an existing learning academy that already exists for ICT. So it could be any number of ways, but we're looking at bringing in distance education and practical cybersecurity labs where people can practice hacking, creating cybersecurity master's programs or foci as part of computer science degrees or computer engineering degrees. So a lot of training in various different ways, business recovery, business continuity, and we're looking also at awareness raising campaigns and building the foundations, in short, for digital transformation on solid grounds through a secure by design model and tools. So making sure that cybersecurity is not an afterthought that's brought in at the end and kind of superimposed on whatever is happening, but is really part of the design of models and tools. We also have a multi-donor trust fund that we've recently launched a few years ago that has a number of donors in it and is now dispersing through grants to support cyber capacity building activities in our client countries. And this is a trust fund that's accessible to the governments of those countries through their World Bank task teams. So it's really cybersecurity capacity building is really a key objective of our development work. And we think that cybersecurity globally is only as strong as the weakest link. Because of our interconnectedness within and across countries, we all need to work on cybersecurity. I want to mention two things that I can touch on now, and maybe we'll talk about a little bit more later. We need to do more to attract and retain women in cybersecurity. Fewer than 20% of cybersecurity professionals are women. In Africa, women represent only 9% of cybersecurity professionals, and the Middle East and North Africa, only 5%. We simply cannot afford not to encourage and support women to enter the cybersecurity workforce globally. And there's a huge opportunity for young women and girls to participate in protecting their communities. So that needs to happen. With that, let me stop here and give the floor back to Stan. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anat. I think as you illustrate, there are so many different aspects to this that affect what we do in development that we don't always think about it. And I think for the conventional development sectors that we've worked in for so many years and decades, there's not always a connection made about why this is so critical to what we do. Everything from the critical infrastructure you mentioned to things like just providing healthcare We know that health records are one of the most targeted forms of data in the black market and by cyber criminals, because they're so valuable, and not for the healthcare content, but for all the personal information that's in those records. And that's just one example of so many different ways. Digital financial services are very similar. Economic payments digital payments and all of this are also get targeted for a whole range of things. And this data is often not used in the ways that we tend to think about it. There's a rapidly growing both licit and illicit data economy across the world and how data gets shared in a lot of different ways that we don't fully understand or appreciate. And then I think the other part is that you mentioned ransomware as a fast growing challenge, which it is, but I think we have to recognize that it's not just, even if a company, or in some cases like Costa Rica, a country decides it's going to pay the ransomware, that's not where the cost ends. The cost of rebuilding after that, of repairing your systems, of repairing data sets, of getting back online, rebuilding trust, all that is often estimated at millions, if not tens of millions of dollars, depending on the scale of the attack and who's attacked. But for the kinds of organizations that we work with, or poor governments, that's often beyond what they can do, or something that's going to take them a long time to do. So I think there's a set of costs here that we need to kind of understand how dire this can be in some circumstances. With that said, I want to go to some of these questions and then make sure we leave time for some Q&A as well. Given that this is such a nascent issue in the development space, I think there's a lot of people that are questioning, is this something that we should be looking at as development, as a development community, as a development priority? This isn't what we do. We're not cybersecurity technical people. We do, health and education and economic growth and all these different things that we've done for so long. How does this fit in? And do we have an obligation to look at this? Shouldn't someone else take care of this? And so I'd like to ask, do we have an obligation to really try to help strengthen cyber capacities, in the countries that we work and with the governments that we work? And why is it in our interest as development actors to do that? Why don't we go to Chris first and then to Anat?
I guess I'd answer that question sort of with a metaphor, an analogy too. Our job is to build buildings. Why should we build a foundation? Why should we do this? So, it is a relatively new area in a lot of areas. As I said, I was one of the first, or the first cyber diplomat in the world, and that's only 10 years old. That idea of treating this more as a policy issue and not just a technical issue. And we've seen, not just because of some of the things that Annette, you said, ransomware, for instance, but also a lot of the nation state activity that we need to treat as a policy issue. You don't necessarily need to be a coder to understand the geopolitical and economic and other aspects of it. And there is an economic dimension to this. And there is a dimension that undergirds countries actually achieving these digital dreams that they have around the world. And that's increasingly what they're tagging their economic development to. So yes, I do think, even though it may be unfamiliar, and I know from experience trying to forge within the State Department this new area of diplomacy, to people who are like, well, we don't do this, we haven't done this before. That even if you haven't done that before, don't be scared of it, first of all. Don't be scared because you think it's some technical issue. There's a lot that you could, there's a lot of parallels to the work you're already doing. And as I said, it's foundational, a lot of the work you're already doing. And yes, I think in the future, given where our societies, our economies, our infrastructure is going in terms of everything you traditionally have done, and as I said earlier, what those things are built on. Dams are controlled by digital controls that are subject to cybersecurity issues. Food distribution is now done largely through computers and computer networks. Economies depend on this. Almost everything you can think of, including most of the UN development goals, I think, are linked to this. So don't be scared of it. Embrace it, and it is something I think there is an obligation to do if you want success in all your other programs. I want to just add one thing on something Annette said too. I do think the gender issues are important here, as they are really across the board, but they're certainly important in this space. And one of the activities that the GFC has been doing is a Women in Cyber program, trying to get more women into this at policy and other levels, and even these negotiations that have been happening in the UN and other places around the world. And finally, I just say, one of the reasons you should get into this is it is kind of the hot new topic. I mean, this is being discussed everywhere, in every forum, in every UN forum, in every regional forum, and I do think it's important for us to do. And then finally, I'd say one of the things we're trying to do to achieve this is to bring these communities together. Is the GFC in partnership with the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and the Cyber Peace Institute plans to have a big conference, a high-level conference, where we get high-level government officials, high-level other officials, but most particularly, key people in the development community and the cybersecurity community together to really think about how we can make progress in this area, how we can launch agendas, how we can prioritize this. That will be sometime next year, and we'll communicate through the organizers of this what the date and place of that will be, which are still being worked out. So that's one of the ways to try to achieve this.
Thank you. Anat?
Thanks. So, obligation almost sounds like a legal term. I'm not a lawyer, but, I feel like in many cases where there is an agreement or there is a legal treaty or there is some kind of formal obligation, obviously, that speaks for itself. But what I want to say is that we have a very strong interest to help developing countries in the area of cybersecurity for a number of reasons. One of them is what I mentioned earlier. We're all interconnected. This is a globalized world. And an attack that happens in one country is going to be copied in other countries. And it really is on us to make sure that the method and the way and the approach of an attack in country X will not be repeated in country Y. So we have to collaborate. We have to work together. And the most vulnerable country is the weakest link in the chain. And we all have to help that vulnerable country because we don't want cyber criminals to be able to use the same method of attack twice. It should not happen. We should be sharing information. We should be sharing information about threats, about incidents, about responding to those incidents. And we should be sharing technologies and supporting developing countries to make sure that cyber criminals are not able to take advantage of their vulnerabilities. So I think we all have a very strong interest from that perspective of making sure that all of us are protected as a chain. The other point is that we really need to protect our investments. We as the World Bank, we provide investment lending, obviously, to make large-scale reforms happen. So if we take another type of infrastructure, so of course, digital infrastructure being one example, but let's say we wanted to build a bridge, would we be really building a bridge when there was a large risk of that bridge being, blown up or commandeered or, taken over? No, we would make sure that there are safeguards in place and risk mitigation measures in place for that bridge to remain open for the beneficiaries. So it really is this way also. Why would we not make sure that cybersecurity is included by design in any of our projects that involve digital systems? So if we are investing in an IFMIS system in a developing country, an integrated financial management system, or if we're investing in a health information management system, or if we're investing in some kind of transport system, anything that is based on digital infrastructure and data, especially personal data, it is paramount for us to build cybersecurity by design into that assistance so that we protect the country's investment, we protect the beneficiaries' data, and we protect our investment as well.
Yeah. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. I think we need to consider this as even though it's not something we're familiar with, we have to consider it as a part of the risk mitigation of the development work that we do, which, as Chris pointed out, there's very little distinction anymore between development and digital development. Almost everything we do is using digital technologies. And even the development programs that we do that maybe don't directly leverage digital technologies as a part of the project or program itself, the people that are implementing that program, the environments in which you are implementing them our digital technologies are infused throughout that, through communications and social media and everything else, and all the day-to-day use of computers and systems just for the most basics of programs. And even in parts of the world where we may not expect it to be playing a big role, it is. One of the really interesting facts that I've seen is that even during the war in Syria, connectivity continued to increase. The number of users of the internet continued to increase because it was so important to everybody. But at the same time, all that data that was now being generated was largely insecure because the systems hadn't been put in place. So you had vulnerable populations that were increasingly dependent on these systems, but that the systems themselves weren't secure. And we need to think about that so that when we invest, as you say, in our programs and in these initiatives, that we're mitigating those risks and we're setting the right foundations for them to be sustainable over time. And that's kind of, this is the modern version of the sustainable thinking that we've always tried to integrate into what we do. And I want to go back to you with another question that I know you've talked about before, and it's how do we find this balance between working in countries that kind of are the darling countries, as they were, where everybody kind of know a lot of donors are going to, and we're working in, and international investors maybe focus there first on digital and cyber issues, and they're darling countries because they may have taken some initial steps and they may have put some legislation in place to start to build capacities and have a strategy, but they need help to continue to build it out. And on one hand, we want to reward that and make sure that that progress is continued, and that we use that as a pilot to show how this can be done effectively. On the other hand, there's a whole lot of other countries, I think as you've mentioned, the orphan countries, that don't get that attention, that don't get those resources and support, but that also have very fast growing needs in all this, but may or may not have taken steps themselves to do things. So how do we address that dichotomy, and how do we find the right balance between the need to make progress and show that it can be done and build out the discipline, while at the same time recognizing all countries need support in this, and even in the harder countries to work, we need to find ways to offer support.
Thanks very much, Stan. Yes, this is something that I've noticed in my work, particularly in Africa over the last few years. We see that some countries are almost overrun by donors. You go to visit to implement the project, and you see other teams from other donor organizations have either just been there, or they're there at the same time as you, or they're going to be there next week. And you're almost literally, competing for the same attention and from the same time from the counterparts in meetings. Sometimes you find out that other donor partners are doing work that's really very, you're hoping that it's not going to be overlapping, and then you have to have conversations to find out if they're overlapping. So we on our side, we need to do a lot of donor coordination, and that's certainly something that my team and I are very focused on. We want to make sure that at the working level, at the technical working level in country, all of the teams are coordinating across the different donor organizations. So let me, if I jump ahead for a quick second to some of the recommendations, donor organizations need to work together and align and coordinate at a very high level, but importantly at the local level, at the technical level, and the people who are actually working in the country, they need to talk to each other to find out what they're doing. So what we found is, for various reasons, donor organizations are somehow zooming in on the same countries. And some of it is, they're working on countries that used to be part of their colonial empire, or some of it is that their ODA, their foreign, bilateral aid systems have identified these countries as priority countries for political reasons, and oftentimes countries will focus in on the same ones for political reasons. Sometimes it's because these are amongst the low-income countries, sort of our emerging leaders, and we want to, as you said, Stan, reward them and encourage them and enable them. So this is, and I won't name names, but it is really quite stark that we have a situation where 2 or 3 and sometimes 4 donors are actively trying to work with the same countries, and then we have other countries where literally nothing is happening. No one is there. No one is helping them. There are no grants. There are no, special programs. So we come in as the World Bank.
Do you see a means to address that? What would you suggest on how we could do that better, to coordinate better, so that we're not all putting the same resources in the same places?
We need to talk amongst ourselves and essentially say, I think the message needs to go through to the various to the various ODA, the people who define the priorities. We need to put our heads together, and we need to say, these are the countries that really need our help, and no one is there. Who is taking which country? Who is helping which country? I don't see much of any other way. Everybody needs to take a good, long, hard look at their prioritization of countries, and see whether they can expand the scope, expand the geographic scope, and see whether they can take on at least one or two of these countries. And then we just need to essentially find different donors who can take on some of these countries that may not be a priority for them.
Stan, if I can jump in.
I want to go to you, Chris, because you guys are working on some of this coordination, I think.
Exactly. I mean, I think this is look, there are lots of reasons, as Anat has said, that countries prioritize different countries, and sometimes prioritize the same country, and that can, given the relative shortage of resources, that could really be devastating, because if everyone's focused on one country and not some of the other countries, when the resource is not enough to go around, it's a problem. And so, what the GFC tries to do is we have both donors, implementers, and recipients who are all together and have these conversations. Now, it doesn't solve everything, certainly, but I'll give you an example. We've done a lot of work in Africa recently. We've created an African cyber experts group throughout Africa to try to help this coordination, help amp this up. I remember doing something just before the pandemic in the Pacific Islands, where we're creating a new hub now, a regional hub, which we're doing around the world. And I remember one of the Pacific Island countries saying to me, look, we have like 10 different countries wanting to help us set up a national computer emergency response team, and telling us how to do it 101. We already know that. You're taking up all our capacity with trying to give us capacity building. So what we need to do, and part of this is that coordination that Nat talked about, having people meet and talk together and try to sift through priorities that, they may still do things in the same countries, but maybe they'll do different aspects of it or different timeframes of it, which I think is important. Part of it is going to a demand-driven model, which is something that our organization has been embracing the last couple of years, but it's not always true for some development or cybersecurity capacity building work in the past, where often countries say, here's what you get, here's what we're going to give you, rather than actually having the conversation with the recipients and saying, well, what is it you need, and how can you build on that? What is your capability to absorb that? And we need to move to that model. Now, that's something I'm sure a lot of the development community has already done, but it's something that I think we need to do more globally.
Right.
Stan, I'd like to add one point to this also. The way that the World Bank can work with other donors is for other donors to do some of the more, diagnostic assessments or agile, quick types of analyses that are required upstream, and for the World Bank to come in and fund the recommendations that are coming out of these assessments downstream, which involves usually a higher price item that other donors are not able to necessarily come up with. So we find that on our side, developing a World Bank project takes some time. And during that time, other donors could come in and do the assessments, and then we can use those assessments to really fund the large ticket items that are coming out of that work. So that is one way to work together.
No, I agree. And I think that needs to be a part of our coordination efforts, is identifying where our relative strengths and weaknesses are as different donors and support organizations and implementers as well, and where our geographic priorities are, and how are we going to manage right now a too limited amount of funds to address all the different challenges. But we need to have a more strategic approach to how we do that. But that also means that we need to have some common standards and some common understanding of what do we mean by capacity building? What are where do the priorities need to be when working with different countries and so forth? So that we have work to do, but at least we're having these conversations now, and through efforts like GFCE and the upcoming global conference on capacity building, the more that we can do that kind of thing and focus these questions and efforts and come up with some real plans for how we respond as a community, I think the better, more effective we're going to be.
That's right. We'll just let Chris solve it with GFC.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, that's the outcome of this, Chris. You guys get to solve it all. We only have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure we leave time for questions from the group. Let's see. I just want to make sure. Will we see questions in the chat if people put them in? right. I'm going to keep asking. There's a couple other quick questions I want to ask you guys, but as we get more questions from the audience, then we'll turn to those as well. Okay. So if anyone in the audience has questions for the panelists, please send them, and then they will be sent on to us, and then we'll respond to those. And kind of quick rapid fire, there's a couple of things I would like you to address. One is, what do we need to improve as development organizations? Like, what are we doing wrong that we need to do better? To kind of put it on ourselves as well, instead of just looking out and saying, okay, we need to do all these different things in partner countries. What can we be doing better? And beyond just coordinating better. And then where do you see the best opportunities in the near term for really making progress on these issues? I will go to Chris first and then Anat.
Yeah, so a part of it is really drawing these communities together so that we can learn from each other and actually leverage each other's efforts. A part of it, I think, is overcoming some artificial hurdles, like a lot of ODA funding, people believe, is constrained by guidance from the OECD, where they think that cybersecurity capacity building is more security and military funding, which it's not. It's really resiliency funding. I mean, I like to use the term resiliency because that's really what this is. And so, and I think part of it is to as you said, have a better understanding of what we mean by capacity building in cyberspace and how we can put this together. So I think all of those things are things that, again, we're trying to work toward what will be helpful.
Right. Anat?
Yeah, I wanted to touch base on the digital skills aspect of it, which is really important. We're investing a lot of money in computer emergency response teams and other types of incident response capacities. We need people to staff all of these places. We need people to be the chief information security officers in the private sector in developing countries, as well as in the public sector. Where are all of these people going to come from? So I think we as a development community really need to focus on that workforce establishment through education. And that means working together with our education colleagues, with education ministries. There needs to be curriculum reform in developing countries. Cyber hygiene, even at primary education level. You wash your hands, you don't give your password to other kids. You need to think about cybersecurity education in secondary schools. Some best practice countries have cybersecurity as a topic of matriculation exams in high school. So kids graduate with a cybersecurity focus from high school. We need to have better cybersecurity foci and degrees as part of universities. So that will be able to create a new and fresh cohort of cybersecurity professionals to staff all of these positions for the investments that we're making. And I think that's critical, and we need to work together. I mean, I think this needs to be an element of everyone's work, and we need to work closely together with the education establishment in developing countries.
Agreed. And I think what I would add from my perspective is that we need to not only do all the things that you're saying, which I agree with, but think about ourselves as donors and our organizations, and elevate the priority of this with all because we're so focused on a lot of the tech that's out there, because it provides so many different opportunities, and it's sexy to talk about what AI can do and what new biometric technologies can do and all these different things. But we're not then pairing that with, okay, what are the risks that come with it and how do we manage it? How do we build in the resilience, as Chris mentioned, and how do we do that from the start, as you're suggesting? And that, to me, that means we need to have a change in mindsets. And so we need to look within the leadership of our organizations that we think about, what does this mean for us? What do we need to change of our systems, of our own internal capacities, in our training, in our procurement, in our contracting, all the different things that we do? We need to build this into those systems, because if we just depend on people, it's not going to be sustainable. We're not going to keep the momentum that we need. Real change happens when you change the systems. And so we need to think about, what do we do? And that means, change, but also resourcing appropriately and putting in the staffing and the funding necessary to really allow this to be built. And I would argue that there's a real need for cyber in particular, because while we do have some capacity on the technology side, we do have a number of different people working on those different. We have very few people working on cyber, relatively. And we don't have the capacity as agencies on these issues yet. But yet the challenges are growing very, very quickly. And so we need to really kind of make this a priority as development organizations, and then build it into our strategies accordingly. So I'll leave it at that. We have a question that has come in. After several cyber attacks in Latin America, governments are now redesigning their national cyber strategies. How would you promote a multi-stakeholder approach for this design? I think that's a great question for you, Anat. I know that you've talked about the need for diversity in our thinking, and I think that goes to the multi-stakeholder approach.
Yeah,
thanks.
I'm
Yes.
happy to do that too afterwards.
And of course, Chris, and that's the basis of GFCE, so I don't mean to exclude you on that.
So, the good news is that lots of toolkits and guidelines have been written on this. So there's plenty of available material really to guide governments on how to devise a national cybersecurity strategy. The ITU has a very good one that we partnered on. So there's a national cybersecurity strategy guide that the ITU and we have developed together. That's available on the ITU and our own website. ENISA, also the European Cybersecurity Agency, is chock full of information about how to do national cybersecurity strategy. So the good news is there's lots of direct and tangible support. But the point is that cybersecurity really is a whole of government issue. It really affects every public sector ministry. It affects every agency, and it needs to be done in tandem with everybody. So there obviously needs to be championship and leadership from a very high level. That's incredibly important, we found, because if you have leadership, let's say from the head of state office, then that really trickles down to a kind of empowerment and a kind of legitimacy that's useful. But the discussions really need to be had across government, and it's also quite useful to create a national cybersecurity steering committee or a strategy committee that is formed by various stakeholders across government, from Ministry of Justice that needs to adjudicate on cybercrime, law enforcement that need to collect, cybercrime evidence from the scenes, the national telecom regulator. Of course, the communication sector is really important for cybersecurity. Typically, you also have private sector, the Chamber of Commerce, the ICT Chamber of Commerce. You obviously have your national cybersecurity agency, or whoever acts in that capacity. So the list of stakeholders is quite long, and it's important to bring all of them around the table to work on this.
Agree. Chris, I want to give you time to respond as
so
well.
We almost have no time, so I'll just, first I agree with everything that Ned said, and I'd say, look, this is what we try to do. I did this when we were in the U.S. government. We do this in the GFC too, is we really promote the idea of a multi-stakeholder approach to things like national strategies. One of our working groups is dealing with national strategies, and the documents that Ned said are on the Civil portal, plus others, of how you do a national strategy. And the best practice really is to get buy-in, to get sustainability, is to get other stakeholders involved, because yes, there's a security dimension of this, but there's an economic dimension which businesses are important to have in the fold for. There's a human rights dimension too, and so having all those stakeholders part of conceiving and writing the strategy also helps to get legitimacy and long-term sustainability. So that's critically important. And since just to answer one of the other questions that's on here about making this a priority for organizations, it has to be more than just the IT ministries. The IT ministries are lovely people, but they deal with more of the technical issues. So you have to, raise it at a level, you can coordinate in various different ways. It could be at the prime minister or the president level. It could be a senior agency, but having many agencies working together, everything from the cybersecurity agencies, the finance ministries, to the commercial agencies, to the Homeland Security agencies, they all really need to be part of this, and that helps make it a priority and make it sustainable. So that is important. And finally, I just say again, the conference we're having is meant to address those issues and more, but there's a lot of material already out there for that. And making this more of a priority is certainly something we're trying to do, and that's the whole point of the conference, or one of the big points of the conference, and getting aid agencies to also step up and do more on this area, although that's beginning.
Thank you. And thank you to you both. And thank you to the organizers for giving us this time. We are unfortunately at time now. There's so many different issues here that are relevant to this conversation that we have not yet been able to cover. But I think it illustrates why this is such an important sector to look at in development. And this is going to continue. These conversations will continue. They will continue to evolve. We encourage people to reach out to us if you have questions or thoughts. Take a look. I highly recommend taking a look at the Sybil portal that GFC has put together. Tremendous amount of useful information there, and also the cybersecurity primer that we put together if you're more focused on development, implementation of programs, and so forth. But with that said, I think we are at time, and thank you both.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris.
I've enjoyed the conversation.
See you guys.